Justine and Maria are getting situated, we're going to continue, as Mark had indicated, with two organizations that will be sharing a little bit more about their growth journeys, much like was started yesterday with Forefront Living and Rockwood Retirement Communities. And so this morning, I'm pleased to have two individuals, Maria Timberlake, who is the Vice President of Senior Living with John Knox Village in Lee's Summit, Missouri, and Justine Vogel, who is the CEO of the RiverWoods Group in Exeter, New Hampshire, who are going to share a little bit more of their journeys. We'll start off first with both Maria and Justine talking a little bit about what is their story for each of their respective organizations' growth, and then we're going to go into and ask some questions of each of the different organizations. So appreciate you all joining us this morning. We'll kick it off with Maria Timberlake, who will share a little bit more about the John Knox Village story.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Brad. So John Knox Village is a life plan community in Lee's Summit, Missouri, which is in the southeast quadrant of the Kansas City area. So we're on the Missouri side, and we're 52 years old. And early in the village's history, we were the only game in town, and we grew with leaps and bounds. And literally at one point we had over 2,500 residents on a large campus. Well, over time, our product started to age. The campus started to look a little tired, especially our apartment product. And we had hundreds of studios that were less than 450 square feet. None of our apartments had washers and dryers. Most did not have dishwashers and walk-in showers. So our best apartments at the time, our larger 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, didn't have balconies or patios. The first floor of those buildings were partially below grade. And that product really started becoming obsolete with the entry fee market. So what happened is we decided that we would make some of those units available for a rental contract. And over time, the rental move-ins grew, the entry fee move-ins declined, and that wasn't good from a financial standpoint. But on the flip side, we had a growing and very robust health services business, an ambulance service, a home health agency. Then we established hospice. We grew from 1 to 3 assisted living units, 1 to 3 assisted living memory care units. We had a 420-bed nursing home, and about 100 of those folks were coming from the community. So the good thing was that the health services was propping up the independent living business, which was in decline. But we knew that that model was not sustainable. And so back in 2006, we started to put together a team to develop a new apartment complex and villa program on our vacant property on the west side of our campus. And then the recession hit, and we tabled that project, which proved to be a really good decision. And as we moved out of the recession, we decided we needed to take a really bold move and really reinvest in our independent living side of the business. And we wanted to not only redevelop the physical nature of the campus, but we wanted to be more purposeful and intentional about our culture. And we felt if we could marry an improved physical campus with an improved service environment, then we could really redefine the village experience. And that's where Greystone came in. So our first question was where to start. So this is our campus. We had 15 zones of independent living. The green zones are non-congregate housing. The blue or purple were our apartments. The red and yellow are healthcare, and the brown ancillary buildings. And if you would have asked any member of the senior management staff or the marketing team where to start, we would have had a whole lot of different answers. So we had to take a deep dive and do an honest assessment of what we had. And we looked at each of those zones, what was the occupancy, what was the contract mix, entry fee or rental, what was the average length of residency, what was our lost monthly service fee revenue, et cetera. And then we coupled that with a marketing review of the pros and cons, what amenities were in the area, what were the views, that kind of thing. And then we turned that over to Greystone, who basically said, right, Stuart, you're getting what you're asking for, you got a problem, you need to change. So this is just one depiction of how dire the situation had become. Between fiscal year 2011 and 2013, we had 429 move-ins into independent living. 73% of those residents were coming in on a rental contract. Well, with the big campus and the service-rich environment that we had to be getting back to being an entry fee community, or we wouldn't be sustainable. And so we took that deep dive that we did internally of all those zones and what they had going for them and what was working against us. And Greystone conducted an exhaustive market study. And we had always said that we served the middle 3/5 of the market. But what the study showed is that we were entirely missing the top 1/5 of the middle 3/5. And we just didn't have a product to attract the entry fee market. And at the same time, there were more options available to the market. So we knew that we had to change because our financial picture was getting dire on the IL side, and because there was market out there that was ready and available if we had the right product. So we put together a good, better, and best strategy. You could only bite off so much at one time, right? So we had to accept that some of our apartments we were going to have to consider good. And we would do enough to maintain both the units and the buildings and the amenities to have them maintained for a while we focused on the more severe areas of the campus. On the right side of your screen, you'll see a complex. It's called the Courtyard Complex. And the first thing we did was fast track some redevelopment in that area to get ourselves going, to start positioning ourselves higher on the entry fee side. And we could do that while we were still working on a major complex in the heart of the campus. So we tore down 2 apartment buildings that only had 7 residents in them. And we expanded a parking lot that served...
Did you let the residents move out first?
Yes, we did. Actually, if you guys know our president, Dan Rexroth, he's our CEO, his mom was one of those residents.
Oh, no.
So, yes.
Oops.
Yeah. Oh, well. So we tore down those 2 apartment buildings, and we added some new amenity space and renovated some existing amenity space. And then we also developed a plan to wrap around a park in the middle of our campus. So our very worst units had the best locations, views of the golf course, views of the lake, views of the park. And so there we actually notified 102 households that they were going to have to relocate on our campus. And that was one night, the night before, that I didn't sleep very well because that was a little bit nerve-wracking. But we worked with Greystone and our architectural partners, SFCS, and developed a new complex to really leverage those physical attributes of our campus. So going back on the first product, Courtyard, that became our better product. So good was our decent, older, smaller, primarily rental apartments. And then this became our better product. This was 52 units, and they had beautifully high ceilings, beautiful big windows, all the features that you would expect. Our first units to have washers and dryers. We added a new dining venue, a new salon, a small theater. And if you look in the picture of the apartment building, you can see a porte-cochere. That complex had so many different entries, but there was no main entry. So we established a main entry, we put our first concierge in place, and then we enhanced some of the adjacent common space in the older apartment buildings. And what was so wonderful about this is, of course, those plans for all those amenities helped market that 52-unit apartment building, but it also enhanced the satisfaction of the residents who were already there, but they weren't paying for any of it. So The difference on this apartment complex or building is that the average unit size was, I think, 858 square feet, which was dramatically bigger than our apartment stock that we had in our older product. So the Meadows project was 4 buildings, 3 apartment buildings and 33,000 square feet of common space. We added another concierge desk, beautiful grand entry. We used Studio 65 out of Austin as our interiors firm. We had an aquatic center, fitness center, community center, 2 dining venues, and some activity and meeting spaces. And so the good, better, best was not only reflected in the apartments in terms of the size and the features, but also in the amenity space. So really we have 3 product lines, if you will, on the IL part of our campus. This was started as 112 units, but we did some combos and ended up with 104 units. And it's been a real success for us. So this kind of shows you the journey that we've been on. Back in 2014, if you looked at it from our IL business from a unit standpoint, and you looked at the rental units and the entry fee units, only 22% of our units were geared toward the entry fee market, and the rest were drawing rental residents. At the end of our fiscal year 2022, which ended March 31st, from a unit standpoint, we were 50-50. And so that's been a significant improvement as we've tore down all that old inventory and replaced it with entry fee inventory. In fact, between 2014 and 2018, we tore down 314 units and 187,000 square feet of living space. But we replaced it with 204 units and 190,000 square feet, which was 100% entry fee. So the more significant change beyond the contract mix or the unit mix is if you look at the square footage. So of our total marketable square footage in independent living, we were at 34% entry fee and 66% lease. And at the end of last fiscal year, we had switched that. So 66% of our marketable square footage in independent living is now what we would consider an entry fee product. So one of the significant things about the Meadows, which was the larger project that wrapped around the park, was were we going to capture that sliver of the market that Stuart told us was there, but that we weren't reaching at the time. So you can see our average age from the existing campus sales in 2018 compared to the Meadows really didn't change. But where we saw a significant change was in the number of couples. In our existing campus, based on the unit size and the unit type, we were only drawing about 27% of our new move-ins being couples. And with the Meadows, it was 60%. And then more significantly, if you go down to the net worth, you're talking almost 3 times the net worth, from just under $500,000 to almost $1.5 million. And then the monthly income also considerably higher, from about, what does that say, $3,200 to $5,200 a month. What's not on this chart is a profile of the 43 depositors we have on our Meadows expansion project, which is underway right now. The average age of those 43 depositors has dropped to 74, which has been a significant change. And I think it was just because when we did the Meadows, the market wasn't really sure if we really were going to be different, if we really had redefined ourselves. And doing the Meadows, I think, proved that we were changing, and we were able to draw a younger clientele. The net worth of those 43 depositors averages at $2.6 million, and the monthly income at $6,200. So again, it shows that when you do that deep dive and you understand what your problems are, you do a good market study, you price it right, have the right product, that you can draw the market that you want. So just really briefly mention that we are expanding our Meadows project. Throughout this whole time, we also have been tearing down old cottage product. So we would have a fourplex of small cottages, tear it down, replace it with some villa homes. And so We're currently under, just starting phase 8, and we have phases 9, 10, and 11 planned as well. And then we've already identified our next congregate project, which is to tear down a building called Lindbergh. Tracy, Wenson, don't you tell any of those residents that live there. So we haven't announced that yet, but we're looking forward to tearing that old thing down and replacing it with another apartment building in our better category, like the Courtyard project. We also have done a number of renovations in our healthcare areas and some of the amenity space in those older apartment buildings, again, to keep them marketable as we do the more significant renovation elsewhere on campus. And I do want to mention the last thing on this slide, our culture initiative. So I mentioned early on that we wanted to not only redevelop the physical nature of the campus, but that we wanted to elevate our service. So we also worked with Greystone on that project, and they walked us through a really robust process of trying to be more purposeful and intentional about what we wanted our culture to be. So every organization has a culture, right? But not every organization takes the time to define it or work toward a culture that they want. And so we worked through a process with them and landed on PRIDE, which stands for Personal Responsibility in Delivering Excellence. And Greystone helped us understand how we could work that into the hiring process, the onboarding process, the training process. And then we started getting it integrated into individual departments, whether that's housekeeping or the concierge service or activities or finance, whatever. And it really has become ingrained in who we are as a community. And not only has it been beneficial from an associate standpoint, but our residents have embraced it as well. So here's a quick peek at our Meadows expansion. So again, it wraps around the park, so those people in that new building are going to have some beautiful views. So from a financial standpoint, what has this meant for us? So if you look at this graph, it takes you from 2013 all the way out to 2030. And you can see the red line are our gross entry fees, and they've grown consistently over the years with peaks when we've brought those new projects online. So the first peak coming when we filled up the Courtyard and Meadows project. The next peak will be coming starting in October of this year when we open, right, Josh and Eric? When we open the Meadows expansion. We actually have that projected at a 24-month fill-up, but considering the pre-sales, we're going to outperform that. I'm pretty confident on that. And then the third peak being when we tear down, rebuild, and then fill that our next congregate project. So you can see that has been a steady and healthy growth in our entry fee proceeds, which have made a significant change in our financial sustainability. So is Gail here from CLA? I saw her last night. CLA worked with us on our feasibility study back in 2016, and at that time we projected out 6 years. So at the end of fiscal 22, we decided to look back and say, you know, how did we do versus our feasibility study? And we were pretty pleased considering all that's happened in the world with where we landed. Our monthly service fees were a little higher than we had planned. Our our expenses were off, and you can see that there on the chart. One of the challenges that we had on our campus, and this relates to John Spooner's slide that had that we needed more dining venues, right, John? Isn't that what you said? We do not need more dining choices. So when we pro forma the Meadows project, we assumed that all the residents moving into the Meadows would use their dining credit at the 2 new Meadows restaurants, even though we knew that was not in any way how it was going to happen, because those Meadows residents could eat at our other dining venues on campus, and residents who lived elsewhere could eat at the Meadows. So we were trying to figure out how to make sense of that and predict what the residents would do, but it didn't work out that way. So we did have a lot of restaurant traffic over there at the Meadows, and our expenses were higher than we had planned. But we were within $286,000, so we thought that was pretty good. So then we looked at our consolidated performance and how the Meadows helped us overall as an organization compared to where we thought we would be at the end of the project based on the 2016 feasibility study. You can see that our entry fees were higher than we had planned, as were our days cash on hand. And then some of those other metrics, we were a little bit off, but we felt really good, again, about where we landed, comparatively speaking, especially considering the last couple of years being so challenging. So, you know, it has been a big journey for us. It was the bold first step after doing that honest assessment of ourselves and then working with Greystone on the market study. But when you work that plan and go through that process, I really think that you can get where you need to be, and our journey continues. So
Great, thank you, Maria. So Justine, you've been at RiverWoods from its initial opening almost 28 years ago now. So, you know, from starting as a single site campus into now what is a 5-campus, 3-community system.
Right.
Would love to hear just a little bit, you know, as we kick off before we get into some of the questions, just
Sure.
a little bit about the RiverWoods
Sure.
Group story.
I think our story is a little different because we're younger as an organization. We're 28 years old, so we've not had to really reimagine ourselves completely as John Knox Village did. But we've had a different kind of journey as we've accepted another community into our system and then have developed new campuses over the time. So we started just, you know, a charitable not-for-profit, grassroots, so no faith affiliation of any sort. And that was important for us because there was no one else to rely on. There was no big brother, no other higher authority to help us in the beginning. And so we have a certain kind of culture of perseverance that I think has helped us over the course of some stumbles that we've had over time. Our purpose is pretty clear. We've just rewritten this year, committed to creating community and peace of mind for each other, and together we make life better. And the together is a big thing for us, you know, working with our residents and our board and our teams. And it's just sort of a reminder, I think, for the first 27 of my 28 years, it was always residents at the center of the universe. And now we're realizing that if the staff isn't at the center of the universe, it's not going to be anyone there to serve the residents. So just sort of like a little aha moment for us in the last year. So just a bit about our growth, and I'll just walk very quickly through our communities. But RiverWoods Exeter, which is our largest campus and our original community, the Woods campus was built in 1994. So I started in June of 94. We opened in August of 94. And it was a great campus, 200 units, 60-bed nursing home. Everything was great, except we could not be we were cash flow positive, but we couldn't be margin positive. And over time, and I'll say completely, there was a tiny little bit of mission desire, but mostly we just wanted to be able to make some money. We built our second campus, the Ridge, and that served a slightly higher end. We had sort of flipped the units. We had 2/3 one-bedrooms at the Woods campus and 1/3 two-bedrooms. Flipped that at the Ridge to try to even out that unit mix. And then in 2006, 2007, we decided, okay, we'll use the rest of our land to build our third campus. Everything was going swimmingly. We designed. We went through the approval process. We had just received our town approvals, and then some neighbors sued us, and then that slowed things down a little bit. But everything was just fine. September 2008, we were getting ourselves ready to finance the project and move forward when Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy and everything went a little crazy. We were super fortunate in that we were able to finance the boulders. Because we were the only big building project in our state and perhaps the country at that time. We got a pretty good deal on it, so that was kind of great. And ended up building our Boulders campus that filled up pretty quickly, surprisingly, even though 2009 was still, in 2010 were still rocky times. So what happened at that time was our board said, we know we want to continue to grow, we know this is the right thing to do, but we can't do it this way. We had basically, we had put all our eggs in one basket, and that was, I think Tim may have said yesterday, there was no off-ramp. There was no off-ramp for us. We were all in on this during the, major financial recession. So we established the RiverWoods Group, and the RiverWoods Group is our parent organization, our supporting organization, and the concept there is that we fund the system through our communities. We provide certain centralized services, but we also use what we call available assets formula, whereby if the communities have more cash on their balance sheet than they need for their own operations or their own capital reinvestment, we move that up to the system, and that allows us to deploy those resources in terms of system growth. So the first thing we did was we had a community in Manchester that had been established by a hospital system. 2 hospitals had gotten together in the city of Manchester, New Hampshire, and gave birth to this senior living community. Then the hospitals a year later got divorced and emancipated their minor without any money. And so that didn't work out so well for what was then known as Hillcrest Terrace, became known as Birch Hill, and is now RiverWoods Manchester. So that community had struggled over the years. It was the same age as our Woods campus, but it had never reached 90% occupancy. It just had never really stabilized. So they joined us in 2016, and then about the same time that RiverWoods Manchester was joining us, we started development on our third community, RiverWoods Durham. So I'll just quickly buzz through these. It gives you a sense of size of each of the communities. Exeter is our largest, Manchester is our smallest, and RiverWoods Durham is our newest. And Maria had all kinds of details, which I will not share with you, but I will share with you the picture of the executive directors who are in the back of the room and did not save me a seat for the second day in a row. So I'm just going to leave their picture up there for another minute just to punish them. So the RiverWoods Group system is, we've centralized at this point, centralized finance, IT, HR, quality, marketing, and administration. And we have about 44 FTEs in that group. Some of them had been part of the other communities. We had finance services and some IT and some HR within each of the communities. And in the last few years, we've centralized all those services. And we have 2 representatives we have our whole team is here today because, it's just hotter than a snow cone outside, and we decided that we'd bring them on down here to Texas and let them sweat. So this is the way our system works. We have a parent board. We have a board that governs the existing communities, and that was a process that I won't spend a lot of time talking about, but we had individual boards for the communities, and unifying those boards into one. We decided to start doing that in 2018. We had a task force from each of the boards get together to try to be more efficient. Came up with a plan in the fall of 2019, and then COVID, and the residents were just madder than a polar bear. I mean, it's like you couldn't imagine. One of Brad's questions that he'll ask us is about unifying the stakeholders. We didn't do that. And it wasn't for lack of trying. It was just, folks get so focused on governance and this is my community. And that was a struggle for us. But that has now been completed. So we have the 3 communities, and then we always put on our org chart SPE or STE, which stands for someplace else or something else. Because we want everyone that's working with us, all of our residents, all of our board members to understand we're not done yet. So I won't spend any real time on this, but this is how the communities fund the system, how we fund the services. And then in the last year, just recently, actually, we've gone through a strategic process. And this is the facilitator we used a quote that said, I can't remember all of it, but basically what you're aiming for is simplicity on the other side of complexity. So you start out with all these ideas and everything's complicated, and then you want to get to simple. And this was our simple. Nationally known CCRCs, we want our existing communities to just be the best they can be the best there is. We want to develop what we call a Center for Successful Living, which will be a brain health, proactive, preventive brain health community, but not residential community. And then other non-building based programming that we can serve our larger communities. And as we think about new campuses or new communities in the future, we're thinking now more towards service light. And Brad and I had talked about this probably 3 or 4 years ago. At the time, the concept wasn't about staffing, but now it is. Right now, it's about how can we do more, serve more people, but with fewer staff. So within our system, that's the direction. Within the CCRCs, what we've done is, and we're still working on this, but basically try to define in the green, pink, yellow, and blue boxes things that will be the same across all of the communities, because each community has its own personality. But in the orange box, to get the right things right, each community has its own flavor for what needs to be a little bit different. How's that?
Great. Well, thank you, Maria and Justine, for sharing just a little bit about where each of your organizations have evolved and grown over the course of the history of the organizations. Would now like to spend a little bit of time going through just a couple of questions that as you reflect upon how each of your organizations kind of embarked upon growth, what some of the either things that you did well or what some of the challenges were. So, perhaps starting out with you, Justine, as you look back on what was that initial trigger for growth, back in the early 2000s, from going from, a single campus to what at the time was a second campus on that. And then as you've continued to look at growth, and as you mentioned that you always are out there on something else, or what that next opportunity is, who drove that initial growth planning efforts and that trigger for growth? Was it driven by, you and the management team? Was it driven by the board? A combination of both, or some other kind of initiative? And as you've looked at continuing forward.
Yeah, it's been different over the years. So at first, in the very first campus to second campus in the Exeter community, it was board driven and it was financially driven. It was about money. It was about, we're making a lifelong commitment. We need to make sure we're financially stable. Since then, I think it's been more of our leadership team driven, but our board has always been on board. And we look for a combination of mission and market, mission and business. But I would say having the Manchester community join us was definitely mission oriented. But it was also about understanding that if we want to be a system, we have to be bigger. And there's certain stair steps. Like, growth is not just a nice linear, process. It's very stair steppy, and you have to add some resources to be able to be efficient and be effective. And then you can go along for a while, and then you have to add some more resources. And so for us, it's been a combination of trying to do the right thing financially. When we were building our Durham community, the concept was initially, hey, we can build something a little less expensive. But then the market really asked for something more expensive. And so who were we to say no? But now our board is really pushing us, and that's why, you'll see in those 3 boxes, some non-building-based growth and some non-building-based services, that's going to be more mission-oriented.
Great. And Maria, how about you for the John Knox Village organization? You know, as you looked at what's a pretty dramatic transformation from, you know, 2/3 of rental to entrance fee and other changes.
Right.
You know, has that growth, and even as you mentioned, moving from a health services focused organization to one that is more focused on the residential to drive the bottom line, was that something that was driven by the board, the management team, or what kind of really drove that effort to look at how do you transform the overall business model there at John Knox Village?
Well, it's kind of interesting because when Kim Clockengay joined our organization as CFO, he was asking me and our director of sales and marketing, you know, how come you can't get more entry fees, you know? And we would say, Kim, it's a 432 square foot studio apartment with a bathtub. Tracy Wenson is laughing because she was the sales manager at the time. You know, it's like there's no dishwasher, there's no microwave, there's no walk-in shower, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's like you're not going to get an entry fee on that. So we worked with Susan Bogan at Glen Devens, which is now Attain, and we spent a whole day. I said, Dan, I want a whole day with the executive team. We're going to lay out this story. And boy, I pulled out that PowerPoint. It was about this thick of all the things that we said, and it was July 31st, 2012, and that's when the commitment from the executive team was to start putting together a plan. And Stuart and I were talking recently, and it was 9 years ago this month that Greystone made their first visit out to the campus. So it was really driven by pressure from the CFO onto the sales team, and you know, the convergence of, you know, what we have doesn't work anymore. And it is a really good thing because if you fast forward to today, our 430-bed nursing home a few years ago, we took to all private rooms. So it was like, you know, 215 or whatever private rooms. Today, our census is about 127. Wow. In a big old building, by the way. And so we've stopped taking anybody from the community. We can't staff it. And our home health agency has struggled some. And even our assisted living, although it is bouncing back, had a hard time after the initial wave of the pandemic. So having the healthy IL population that can move through our continuum, I should note that we're seeing, I would say, more robust participation in our foundation from having a higher entry fee clientele. The length of residency is significantly higher for those entry fee residents. They have the discretionary income to do personal training at the fitness center, to use the salons, those kind of things. So just overall, there's so many benefits. That's why we had to get back to being an entry fee community, because we were not sustainable. And going through the pandemic and looking at the aftermath of that, you know, we would have been in a world of hurt.
You know, so speaking of, you know, some of the pandemic or challenges, but you even, you know, mentioned the Meadows Phase 2, which you're undertaking right now. And, you know, we've heard in the news, there's some discussion even as Christy was sharing that while some of the economic indicators indicate that there might be a slowing, we hear about the hyperinflationary environment that we're in, that, you know, for many organizations that, you know, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's a Lehman Brothers bankruptcy or others, that, you know, that there can be challenges that say, you know, perhaps let's set things aside. But as an organization, you all elected to proceed forward with Meadows Phase 2 during the pandemic. So, you know, what were some of the factors that you all as a, you know, executive team as well as the board considered? Did you ever consider putting that on hold or on pause, or?
For about this long.
Okay.
Actually, our entry fee business remained really strong through the pandemic. In fiscal 22, we had $12.6 million of entry fees. It was our lease business or our rental business that really dropped off during the pandemic. And I think the fact that we had proved ourselves to the market. We have a waiting list for our villa product. We have community movers and shakers who are depositors for Meadows too. We felt like everything was aligning the way that we didn't want to take our foot off the accelerator. We really wanted to seize that momentum, and where those kind of moves were bolder back then, it didn't feel as uncomfortable now. And you know, we're ready to keep rolling. Come out and see us. I'll buy you a barbecue.
You know,
And I was going to say, Justine, I mean, I remember at the Ziegler conference up at the Sagamore in Lake George was right when the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, and that you had what was going to be the primary bank that was providing, you know, some of the funding that essentially backed out of the commitment, and that there were a lot of difficult conversations at that point in time, even from a board perspective, on whether to proceed forward or not. And
yep.
so,
Yeah, it was good that we were not a faith-based organization based on the words we used in those difficult conversations. No, you know, I think that was one time, and our board was brave. I think, you know, that was a difficult decision to go forward with what was $80 million of funding in 2008 when we were able to find another bank to come in. But like even now, we're working on with Brad and his team a major health center. So in our Exeter community, we have 3 campuses. Each has its own. Has this for completely efficient. Each has its own health center, assisted living and nursing. So that's not working out so well right now with staffing. But we had plans to unify that anyway. But we've been working on that, and you know, construction prices are going up, interest rates are going up, but we know we have to do it. And you know, the interest rate part doesn't concern me that much because eventually you can refinance. It's just a matter of how do you get through what you need to do. And the world is, you know, economics are cyclical. Good will come back.
Great.
When, I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, there was reference, you know, you mentioned, Justine, some of the challenges from the health center. You know, the pandemic put pressures on all senior living providers, many of which continue today. You know, we know that labor is a continuing pressure, but, you know, what challenges did you encounter, and how, if any, has that impacted your strategic planning efforts, you know, particularly having just completed an update to some of your strategic planning?
Well, I think the biggest change is staffing, right? And the concept of, it's not just a staffing blip, it's the world has to change. So we know, based on yesterday's presentation, what 30 years from now will look like. It's just getting there, right? So how we think about building brand new, full service CCRCs or life plan communities, it's less appetizing right now just because I feel very, very confident we could fill it in a heartbeat. We filled our Durham campus in 150 units in 3 months. So I know that can happen, but I don't know that there's anyone to work there. So as we think about our strategy for the future, what we see are trends for the higher end of the market. There are more people, the age and income qualified. It's just how do you provide the services, have the staff to be able to provide that. And I think that's going to force us more into investing in technology, investing in program management, and investing in like how do we help people navigate so that we're not necessarily providing the services.
How about Maria? You mentioned even just as, you know, some of the challenges on the existing healthcare having downsized, and that even today that you're not even at what that lower, you know, number is, and so.
Right. I think staffing would be our biggest challenge. We have done, each year in our budget cycle, we put in a wage pool, and that allows us to do market adjustments as necessary. And we basically tripled our wage pool in our current fiscal year, knowing we would need to make some significant increases to the frontline staff, grounds, housekeeping, activities, concierge, dining. And we have made some headway with those pretty significant pay increases that were reflected in the residents' monthly service fee, by the way. And but dining has been our hardest, and I mentioned that before. You know, we have 7 dining venues that serve IL and AL, and then we have our dining over at our skilled nursing facility, and that has been the hardest, so we've had to adjust some hours, and the residents have been pretty patient with us, but I don't know how much longer they'll be patient, so we're really trying to look at some different ways of doing things. We do have a big meal delivery service on our campus, so we might need to get one of those robots that Andrew talked about. We do have one of those little robots in one of our dining venues. His name is Chive, and but we don't have all the answers. But I think it's going to force us to be creative and resourceful, and to try to keep all the stakeholders on board, that we're in it together as a community. That's how we made it through the pandemic, residents and associates working together to manage through a difficult time. And so this is just a difficult time. We have to take that same approach and be open and honest and creative and resourceful.
Great, thanks. So, Justine, you mentioned stakeholders, and among them residents, and having just presented at your board and being mocked for showing up in a Hawaiian shirt, and before I could change into my, long sleeve shirt, I know how difficult some of your residents can be. So, as you have gone about this growth period over the years, and some of it's included changes in corporate or organizational structure, other perspectives, how is it that you as a leader have maintained alignment among all of the key stakeholders, and how have they accepted some of that growth, whether it be the board members, your team members, residents and others?
Well, I don't know that we're a best case scenario there. Alignment has been difficult. So with our board and our leadership team, I think we've always been lockstep, and with most of our residents. But we have, when you're in a period of change, and one of the hardest parts for us was Exeter was always a very successful community. So it's I am sure that everything that Maria talked about was incredibly difficult. And when you say, I'm tearing down this building and tearing down that building, but when there's a compelling financial need for change and people can look around and say, oh yeah, we got to do this, you have a story. For our Exeter community, that was hard because they were like, hey, we're fine. And we had to say, yeah, we're fine today, but tomorrow we need to be something different, and the next day something different. And they're not necessarily in that mindset of, our residents are pretty much thinking about their own lifetime, and that may not be 20 years. So that has been a challenge. We've addressed it with unrelenting positivity and a lot of FaceTime and humor and talking behind their back.
And Maria, you mentioned, having to notify 150 residents that you were tearing.
102 for one project,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
And so, as you look at, getting that alignment, whether it be among residents or the board or others, have you had any challenges in getting alignment on all of the changes that have occurred on the campus over time?
I think one of our biggest challenges has been, there's different pots of money, right? So we built these beautiful new buildings, but we were still struggling with our annual capital budget on the existing campus, so it was hard for some of our associates to understand why we could spend millions of dollars over here, right, but they were still driving a truck that, was falling apart. And so that was a challenge. It requires a lot of education, and our campus is so big and spread out, and then we have, people who are in their 60s and people who are in their 90s, and some residents expect their updates from the village get them on their phone, and some don't have computers, and so there's always this challenge. So we have a pretty robust communications team, and really kind of approach it much like you would do your marketing campaign, that you have to have a lot of different pieces, a lot of different avenues working together, whether that's Dan, our CEO, doing a video that we release over our TV station, to Kim working with the Resident Council Finance Committee, to our little town hall meetings or resident council, and try to keep all the leaders on the same page with the same messages, and nobody going rogue that ends up, causing some kind of grief. But it's always, communication is a challenge. Even in a perfect world, so you really just have to have the resources to lay out communication plans and educate and inform and, be honest and timely in your communication with all your different constituencies. And then you have to realize that not everybody's going to agree with everything, and be willing to manage through that.
Great. So maybe as we close out, one final question. So I'll start with you, Maria. As you look at it, and this could be either personally or organizationally, what's been I know that we've talked a lot about some of the obstacles and challenges, but what's been the most rewarding aspect as you looked about, some of the growth journey that John Knox Village has been on?
Gosh. Well, I've been there 34 years, and I've had a lot of different growth opportunities, professionally, as new opportunities presented themselves and my responsibilities grew. And so I've always felt like rewarded for the work that we do, but there was something about embracing that process of redeveloping the campus and having a physical manifestation, kind of that people called the Meadows my baby, and I did kind of feel that way. And I learned so much in that process from Greystone, SFCS, our construction partners. I felt like it was just a wonderful opportunity to make a difference in the future. So, if I want to move in, we're still going to be there and be strong because we made the right, bold decisions at the right time, and we worked the plan, and we got the outcomes that we wanted. And I think that's just a very rewarding thing.
And Justine, you started out, as you said, a couple of months before the Woods first opened, and you've now seen, the growth pretty much like of a child. So for you, what has been the most, either personally or organizationally, the most rewarding aspect of this journey?
I think for me, I like to see things reach their full potential, and we have more to do, and so I think my nickname is Target Mover. So we have more to do. There's more for us to do, and I think every time, when each of the campuses in Exeter, came to fruition, you feel that sense of we new lives that we can impact. And when Manchester joined us, it was really struggling, and now it's this month hitting 90% occupancy for the first time, a 30-year-old campus, and just to feel the way that looks and feels different, and the vibrancy there, and then our new campus that opened and was successful right out of the gate. You get this kind of people are happy. We're making a difference in people's lives, and that's I don't know that most other industries get to feel that every day. So even with all the stuff that goes on, it's pretty much worth it.
Great.
pretty much. That's funny. Oh, goodness.
Well, thank you so much, Maria
You're
and
welcome.
Justine. We really appreciate you having the opportunity to share a little bit about each of your journeys.
Thanks.